The Man Who Would Be King by Rudyard Kipling is an epic tale of adventure, friendship, conflict and power, told beautifully in the 1975 movie adaptation, starring Sean Connery, Michael Caine, Saeed Joffrey and Christopher Plummer, with director John Huston. Ever since I first watched this film, I was captivated by the storytelling and sense of adventure. It's simply a very well-made product, with the right amount of authenticity and realism to make the viewer believe that this story could have actually happened. Set in the late 19th century, the film concerns two ex-British soldiers in India, who, through nefarious means, seek a greater life beyond what they've been dealt, and so decide to journey for adventure into Kafiristan to seize control and become kings, in order to loot the region for everything it's worth. Over the course of the story, one of the characters is mistaken for a god by the natives, which creates a very interesting power struggle, and whilst it's quite a simple premise, the way it's done is expertly achieved. Side note here for a second, the region of Kafiristan is now part of eastern Afghanistan, hence why you may not have heard of it. Anyway, now into the characters. The two leading roles are Daniel Dravot, played by Connery, and Peachy Carnahan, played by Caine. This may be Sean Connery's best performance in any movie, ditto Michael Caine's, and their real-life friendship shines through their characters and the conflict they go through, which makes it all feel more real and flow better in the events being told.
But how many men have been where we've been? And seen what we've seen?
Bloody few, and that's a fact.
Being some of my favourite actors, it's also great to see these two amazing personalities in essentially a buddy movie together, and it's a shame that they didn't really star side by side again properly, though they were both in the 1977 war film A Bridge Too Far. It's also equally a shame that Sean Connery never shared the screen with his other good friend, Roger Moore, as together these three were all close friends. Various other actors were considered for the two main roles by director John Huston, who had been wanting to adapt this story into a film for years. These included Clark Gable and Humphrey Bogart, Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas, Richard Burton and Peter O'Toole, and even Robert Redford and Paul Newman, to which Newman recommended Sean Connery and Michael Caine, saying that it should be British actors to play the parts. Needless to say, both Connery and Caine are perfect in the roles, with their commanding on-screen presence, wry humour and credibility. I couldn't imagine this film without them, and they look great in their uniforms. Michael Caine's character of Peachy Carnahan also narrates the story of this film, and so helps link events that happen throughout the runtime, whilst he recalls it to Christopher Plummer's character of Rudyard Kipling. I find it very interesting that the author of the book of this story is a character within the film, as it lends a sense of grounded reality, and we the audience see the author being told the story at the same time by one of the characters within it. That's pretty clever. Plummer also bears a striking resemblance to Rudyard Kipling, which is sometimes uncanny, and he plays it very well, with being somewhat baffled and confused by the actions of Dravot and Carnahan, though he lends some gravitas and leveled judgment to the story too. Michael Caine's own wife, Shakira Caine, plays Roxanne, the love interest of Sean Connery's character Daniel Dravot, who was picked for her appearance, which was similar to the natives of Kafiristan. Her role is largely silent in the film, but she is nonetheless very important for being the catalyst that drives the eventual conflict near the end, which is both beautiful and tragic. Saeed Joffrey also stars and plays Gurkha Guide,
Rifleman Machendra Bahadur Gurung, known to my regiment as Billy Fish.
Billy Fish acts as an interpreter and loyal companion to Dravot and Carnahan, having been left behind as the sole survivor of another expedition prior to the events of the film. Another perfect bit of casting in my opinion. Alongside the main characters come a number of minor roles which are all bit parts in the story. Characters like Uttar are just very amusing to watch, and you can tell the actor had fun with the part. Another character like the High Priest of Sikandagul is very rightly commanding and intimidating at times for what he does, which is actually quite minimal. Amazingly, the actor was apparently over 100 years old at the time. Jack May also plays a small part as the British District Commissioner, who reprimands Dravot and Carnahan after they attempt to blackmail a local Raja, only for himself to be later blackmailed by Carnahan.
Detriments, you call this? Detriments?
This film harkens back to the great adventure stories of myth and legend for me, as it deals with moral and ethical situations which are just as prevalent in those kinds of stories, albeit usually with fantastical creatures involved too. This could also be attributed to a fable for knowing what is right and wrong, or finding a middle ground. This film features the chosen one character trope, which in some cases is overused in other movies, but it fits well within the context of this story as it is integral to the plot. Dravot is struck by an arrow and presumed injured during a skirmish. However, because of his literal plot armor bandolier during the scene, he is unharmed. The natives meanwhile have no knowledge of this and presume him to be immortal and a god, the son of Alexander the Great, who once conquered the region and departed saying an heir would one day return. This heir is Dravot in the locals' minds, who give him the name Sikander, an abbreviation of Alexander. This idea is very similar to the events that happen in The Lost World by Arthur Conan Doyle, specifically the BBC adaptation, where Professor Challenger is mistaken for a god or great leader by the natives, with very similar consequences. Seeing how both The Man Who Would Be King and The Lost World emerged in different times, 1888 and 1912, it's interesting to compare how they portray essentially the same idea, but in wildly different contexts. Whilst reluctant at first to accept this role, Dravot is soon convinced by Carnahan to go along with the god idea, which in retrospect may not have been the best plan. However, these are flawed characters and everyone outside the movie knows this, and yet you still want them to succeed because of their charisma. Carnahan soon realises that taking this too far isn't a good idea, and ultimately they are both doomed to fail because of their pride and arrogance on taking on something they were not meant for. Dravot definitely appears to be less intelligent than Carnahan in some aspects too, which inevitably causes his downfall. After being named Sikander II, the power really starts to get to his head, and comes into direct conflict with the friendship between him and Peachy. At one point when they are ready to leave the region with all the riches, Dravot decides it's best to stay behind and fulfill the prophecy of being the heir to the throne, so convinced he is by his own lie. By some random coincidence during his time in Kafiristan, he also encounters a girl called Roxanne, who shares the name of the woman Alexander the Great married, further confirming his destiny, and meaning that all that is left to do is to marry Roxanne. These are clear turning points for the characters when he knows something won't end well. Another big theme in this story is adventure, as nearly the entirety of the first half of the film is just the characters getting to Kafiristan, and facing the perils of the region they travel through. This really helps sell the danger of moving through the world at this time in history, when cultures and practices were less connected. There are some impressive visuals of the Hindu Kush looming in the background, and the arid and barren landscapes traversed show just how cut off from the rest of the world Kafiristan is. The way the environments and the weather work against the characters is another good touch, with rapids, blizzards, avalanches, and hostile natives to contend with. The pacing is very consistent by showcasing more and more challenges to face as Dravot and Carnahan slowly reach their goal. Setting the scene in India with all the establishing shots before the titles during the opening sequence is equally fascinating. This also helps viewers get into the right mindset for the story, helped in no small way by the music, which I'll talk about in a bit. The location of India plays a pivotal role before the journey, as it's where all the main characters, minus a couple, are introduced, and form a plan to drive the story forward. Both Daniel and Peachy work on various schemes in order to gain whatever they desire before landing on the idea of travelling to Kafiristan, to which they consult Kipling.
My God, you two.
Kipling's place of work bears witness to the start and the end of the journey, nicely bookending the film, and having it start there straight after the titles with almost no information about what's happening is a good cold opening which captivates the viewer. When a stranger calls upon Kipling late one night, we are drawn into the narrative as it's slowly revealed who the stranger is, via Kipling's realizations. Peachy appears nearly unrecognisable here, were it not for his voice and actions which give away his character. It's great how the story begins with his narration carrying over and suddenly flashing back in time to show himself at the start of the story, ready to tell it in its entirety. Dravot, Peachy and Kipling are all Freemasons, and so there's already a connection between the characters when they ask Kipling for aid, and despite him warning them on multiple occasions about what they intend to do, they obviously still go through with it. Kipling also gives Dravot a Freemason pendant as a good luck charm before he leaves, not knowing how important it will become later on. Before all this, Peachy takes Kipling's pocket watch at a station, but upon realising he's a Freemason returns it on a train, which gives him a chance to introduce himself. On the attempt to get to Kafiristan, Dravot also adopts the guise of a mystic prophet to become part of the convoy of travellers into the region, and Connery clearly enjoyed doing this. Once in Kafiristan, the pair set to work in gaining power by helping natives overcome their enemies, and by training their new loyal followers in army discipline, with mixed results. This scene in particular always makes me laugh.
Now, the timing in the British Army has always been 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. You say it at the same time as all the others, right? Don't say it at the same time as all the others. 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
Billy, tell him to say it with the others. With the others. 1, 2, 3. Right, now ready, steady, go. 1, 2, 3. Now, you don't say it before the others. He's saying it before the others, Billy. Not before the others, not after the others. With the bloody others.
Classic Michael Caine. Similarly, these two push their ideologies forward as if they were missionaries sent to convert,
bringing enlightenment to the darker regions of the earth.
This mentality is very colonialist, of course, and works in the context of the era. They also from the get-go pretend they are gods.
Tell him we tumbled from the skies.
Not gods.
Englishman, which is the next best thing.
During this time, they befriend Billy Fish, played by Saeed Joffrey, who stays alongside them until the end of the film, and is vital for translating languages between them and the natives of Kafiristan. He is a delightful character, and friend to our leads, also giving vital plot exposition at times, since he's been living in the region for a while. After Dravot is mistaken for a god, and after winning battle after battle and favour thanks to his status, the pair and Billy Fish are invited to come to the holy city of Sikandagul, built by and for Alexander the Great. The High Priest of the city consults Dravot, and after seeing the Freemason pendant, accepts him as Sikander II. This is because the god they worship also has one eye, like the symbol on the pendant. This dumb luck plays into Dravot starting to believe in the prophecy of being the spiritual successor of Sikander, and you can already see it affecting his judgment.
You mortals wait down there.
This could be another comparison to The Lost World with Challenger.
Clearly, these people recognize natural authority when they see it.
What follows is a somewhat intense coronation, which gives really mixed feelings when watching. Despite the levity of how the locals react, something definitely feels off. The combination of unsettling percussion as it fades between shots showing the throne is certainly disturbing. Dravot is then presented a golden arrow to reflect the arrow that shot him, regal robes for his status as the new ruler, a golden crown, and all the riches in the treasury of the city, which are considerable.
God's holy trousers. Look at the size of that ruby.
Here's a bigger one.
Another thing to note is the fact that both Daniel and Peachy throughout the film constantly say the phrase, God's holy trousers, which is just such a great saying.
God's holy trousers.
Why, Danny? We only have to fill our pockets and walk out of here to be millionaires.
He is free to take what he wants from the treasury, and so he and Peachy hatch a plan to wait until after the monsoons have been, to then load up as much of the loot as they can carry, to make off with it and never return. I love the slow realization between the two as they see all the wealth that Sikandagul has, and the cunning plan they conceive. As the months wear on, however, Dravot becomes more and more convinced about his greater purpose, to the point where he attempts to marry Roxanne in order to leave an heir. Spoilers for the ending here, but unfortunately for them, things don't quite work out that way. Roxanne and the other natives fear that the touch of a god means death to a mortal, and so when Dravot attempts to kiss her, thus sealing the marriage, she bites him, causing him to bleed. This is the catalyst for the downfall, and like all great adventures, their story comes to an end, but the friendship between Peachy and Dravot lives on. Friendship is very important to this story, especially between the two leads, and for the most part there's a mutual understanding of trust and loyalty which they share. Peachy I see is the more rational of the two, but can be just as proud and vain when he wants to be.
No white man has ever been there and come out since Alexander.
Alexander who?
Alexander the Great, King of Greece, about 300 years before Christ.
Well, if a Greek can do it, we can do it.
I love this mentality. Dravot is a bit rougher and more impulsive and less careful. Together they're not the most morally just of characters, which they do actually acknowledge in a scene, which is really good. It makes sense in the story when they're at their lowest point to have this reflective conversation about whether they've had good lives or done the right thing.
In your opinion, have our lives been misspent?
Just with the performances of Connery and Kane alone, you can tell that their characters have lived rich and interesting lives and have stuck together, which makes it harder to watch, particularly when the two argue about staying in Kafiristan instead of leaving while they still can.
Whatever you may think, and however you may feel, I'm a king and you're a subject.
You have our permission to bugger off.
That I'll do, with or without your bleeding permission. And may you rot in hell, Daniel Dravot.
It's also just as hard when you see Daniel pushing the boundaries of the friendship here.
If we're going to make it stick that I'm a god, you ought to bow when you pass in front of me like everybody else.
You don't want these characters to have conflict with one another, and luckily their friendship is so strong that this falling out doesn't last long, and they each forgive one another at the very end. It's quite touching how they do this, and it's very powerful and tragic. Danny and Peachy attempt a desperate escape after the people of Sikandagul realise they are not who they say they are, and you really want them to get away, but you know they won't. Billy Fish is then given the chance to flee, but instead decides to charge at the enemy single-handedly and is killed. Quite brutally, I might add. The pair are then finally caught and dealt their cruel twist of fate. Dravot is forced onto a long rope bridge spanning a chasm as the natives start to cut the ropes, and one can't help but feel sad for both of them in fact, Even with these totally avoidable set of circumstances to have occurred, they have paid the price for their greed and power in the worst possible way. It's all quite like a Shakespearean tragedy in the end. This scene of a bridge being cut was paralleled in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in 1984. Perhaps not intentionally, but the sequence is much the same. The two also make up and have one last conversation before the end.
Peachy, I'm heartily ashamed for getting you killed instead of going home rich like you deserve to, on account of me being so bleeding high and bloody mighty. Can you forgive me?
That I can, and that I do, Danny. Free and full, and without let or hindrance.
Everything's all right.
Despite the dire situation they're in, Dravot quite confidently starts to sing the hymn, "The Son of God Goes Forth to War," in defiance to everyone around him. And with the military trumpets joining in with the soundtrack, this scene is only amplified when Carnahan joins in a lovely duet which is utterly beautiful and so emotionally driven. The bridge itself was built by Carnahan, so the natives destroying it and Dravot in the process is a double gut punch. Hearing these two actors sing together is a fairly rare occurrence, and Sean Connery could actually sing quite well. Just look at Darby O'Gill and the Little People. Michael Caine, however, doesn't quite hit the notes, but it's not about being perfect, it's the emotion behind it which is more important here. When the bridge is finally severed and Dravot is sent plummeting to his death, we're left with a poor Carnahan to finish the song on his own, looking down in defeat and sadness. The story then comes full circle and fades back to Peachy in his present form, whilst his singing echoes into nothing, and we are left looking back at Kipling, who sits there in silence and shock. On top of just watching his best friend die, Peachy tells how he was then crucified between two pine trees, and then set free after miraculously surviving till the next day. Now even though that's only told and not shown, that's pretty heavy. It also finally explains why he looks so startlingly different, and why Kipling didn't initially recognise him. Peachy then recounts that Danny did in fact become king, like he said he would, albeit for a short time, and you can really tell that he is happy that there was some form of brief success there. He then departs Kipling, leaving a bundle on the desk which he opens to reveal Dravot's severed skull, complete with a crown. Suffice to say, this film does not have a happy ending, but the messages of friendship and resilience are very strong. Dravot regrets his actions and shares his apologies with Carnahan, such is the friendship between them. And in the end, neither are saints, they are simply flawed human beings. The strength of these themes is obvious after watching this film a number of times, and it only shows how good of a story it really is. The directing of the shots in this film are incredibly strong, with so many memorable scenes. In a much earlier scene, Peachy and Daniel make a pact and sign a contract in front of Kipling that excludes any involvement with women or alcohol so that they stay focused on the task at hand. I love this moment when just before Dravot signs the contract, he takes one last drink. It's quite subtle. Peachy taking the pocket watch from Kipling in the train station is another subtle blink and you'll miss it shot, which goes a long way to show just how clever moments like this are. The way Dravot and Carnahan light their pipes is great too. They are so in sync and in tune with one another. There is not a bad scene in this film because the script and performances are so spot on. Sean Connery also had a stunt double for when he falls off the bridge. This was the famous British stuntman Joe Powell, who has appeared in numerous films over the years, including James Bond, The Guns of Navarone, and Zulu. Additionally, Steven Spielberg has cited this film as one of the inspirations for making Raiders of the Lost Ark. Whilst this story is set in India, Afghanistan, and Kafiristan, the actual real-life filming locations were in France and Morocco, with studio filming taking place at Pinewood Studios in the UK. The location shoots really help sell how remote and real this film is, and it definitely wouldn't have worked if it was all based in a studio. Maurice Jarre, who also did the music for Lawrence of Arabia, composed the music for this film, and it's a great soundtrack to listen to, thanks to the acoustic instrumentation of classic Indian musicians, which are married with a variation of the Irish song The Minstrel Boy, and Reginald Herber's The Son of God Goes Forth to War, which both have a military march feel to reflect the British characters. With the instrumental pieces include chanting and vocals which go alongside the Asian quality to the music, and all of these combinations work extremely well to put this world to screen. The opening piece never fails to get you in the mood for what is about to unfold, and all the slightly unsettling and mysterious tones of the music certainly help to intrigue viewers, with scenes yet to come. Overall, it's a thoroughly enjoyable bit of score, especially the King's March, which is so joyous and uplifting, with a perfect beat and tune to hum along to. I find myself listening to it quite a lot. The Man Who Would Be King met with moderate success and has generally positive reception towards it, and was nominated for various awards, including everything from the costumes, cinematography, screenplay, and music. It had a budget of $8.5 million and made $11 million at the box office, and is widely regarded as one of John Huston's best directed films. Having two very strong lead actors also helps make this a very enjoyable experience. 1975 was a good year for movies, with Jaws, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and of course, The Man Who Would Be King. This has fast become one of my favourite films of all time, and I'm honestly surprised that it hasn't been as well remembered as some of the others I've mentioned. It's just as good in my opinion, and I would highly recommend watching it again. This has been Ancient Realms. Thank you very much for listening, and see you next time.
Hats on! About turn! Line of left, quick!